Hi, we're Lowther and Mahler LLC, and we want to thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak here today. To begin with, we're going to go through our agenda. I'm going to give you some background on the case, and then we're going to go through the legal, financial, and ethical components of the case as they pertain to our strategy. And then I'm going to give you an in-depth look of our strategy. First, I'm going to paint you a picture of Publix. Publix is an innovative company that uses customer service as their main competitive advantage. They have values, so where is the disconnect between the CIW and Publix? Well, in contrast, we're going to look at the agricultural industry. These workers are paid minimum wage. They get bussed out to the farms, and they're exploited. They're disadvantaged workers. Let's look at one of these workers, Juan. Juan works at one of the 3 most dangerous jobs in the country. His job has the highest rate of chemical injuries in the country, and he rarely gets healthcare benefits for those injuries. Now let's look at Juan as it pertains to Publix's tomato supply chain.
Thanks, Connor. So, Juan, he starts off, he picks the tomatoes, and then gets sent to Publix, and then eventually to the end consumer. The problem, though, is that, as Connor said, they're exposed to lots of risks, but are only getting paid a minimum wage. So the CIW, they stepped in, and they encourage the buyers to pay an extra penny per pound of tomatoes that they purchase in order to subsidize the wages of the farmers. Now, this is an indirect, kind of short-term way of solving this problem. Instead, we would recommend, recommend that Publix create their own standards and apply that to the tomato supply chain. I'll turn it back over to Connor.
As I'm sure you can all see, Publix has a dilemma right here. Respect for persons, as you've seen with Juan's case, isn't being met, and that's a universal value. Universal values should translate to business. Businesses must show these universal values in the way that they work day to day. So now we ask the question, what should Publix do? Well, there's 4 stages to a problem. 1, you recognize the problem. 2nd, you choose the mechanism of which you're going to solve the problem. 3 is the solution, and 4 would be the consequences of that solution. With our strategy, we want to hire an audit team to investigate what's really going on with the farms. Then we want to choose a market mechanism, and then with our solution, we want to drop suppliers with that market mechanism that don't meet our internal standards. And because of that, and Alex will go through later, there's going to be supply and demand consequences of dropping these suppliers. Now Alex is going to go through the legal and financial aspects.
Thank you, Connor. So there are many laws that protect the rights of these workers. However, we will focus on 2, starting with the Occupational and Safety Health Standards Act. Now, to start, the drinking water. The water needs to be clean, needs to be plentiful, and it needs to be located reasonably throughout the premise. Also, with the bathrooms, they need to be located a quarter mile in walking distance of anywhere on the farm. They also need to be clean. Also, what's not on the slide there is what Connor said about how they're exposed to chemicals. And this law prohibits many of these chemicals. The ones that are not are heavily restricted, and that the workers need to have the proper gear and a first aid kit nearby in case it is needed. The problem, though, is, again, it's not enforced. And we'll see that also with the Fair Labor Standards Act, where the minimum wage sometimes is not being met. This is according to the CIW themselves. Again, we have a problem of enforcement. And at the end of the day, the law is only as strong as its enforcement. In the case of the workers on our country's fields, the labor laws are poorly enforced at best. Now let's move on to finances. We're going to talk about the Publix growth versus the market growth. So by Publix growth, we are referring to the total sales of Publix and how that changes from year to year. With the market growth, we are referring to the total sales in the grocery industry in the United States and how that changes from year to year. So we can see here that Publix is always above the market and that they are growing at a consistent rate. This, one, it shows us that the CIW has had a minimal effect, if any, on our overall profits, and if we look at the differences between the public growth and the market growth, we'll get our growth from strategy. And as you can see, our strategy so far has been successful. And I'll pass it off to Connor to talk about ethics.
Thank you, Alex. As I've already stated, respect for persons is a universal value. People have intrinsic value in themselves as an end, not what they can do for a company. This is one of the rules of the game. Another rule of the game is not to engage in fraudulent behavior. These rules of the game provide a basis for humanity to act and for businesses to act. As long as these rules are being followed, a free market is in itself a public good. It is the most efficient value creation there is and creates the least amount of externalities. But these rules of the game provide a basis, but they also provide the farthest a business can go. Any outreach past that by a company for social responsibility is a logical fallacy of appealing to authority, assuming that a CEO would know enough about social responsibility and running their businesses, and that can lead to unintended consequences. Now I'm going to bring up the weak dependency thesis. I believe that the CIW and Publix both want the universal value of respect for persons to be met. I think that they want these workers to be advantaged and feel respected, but their application is what's different. We believe with free market principles and having these internal standards, we can further the public good as a free market value creator and push the workers' good while not having the externalities that the CIW would create. Now to recap with our solution. For stage one, we're going to hire an audit team to investigate the problem. We're going to have standards that they're going to have to meet, and this team is going to go through the farms and see what's really going on with our suppliers. For part two, as Alex has stated, these political mechanisms aren't working, so we have to use a market mechanism. We must be prepared to drop suppliers and allow free market principles to take over as a business. With the free market principles, at the end of the year, if these companies don't meet our standards, we have to be ready to drop them. And with that, we have to deal with the consequences of what dropping these companies could do in increasing price and decreasing quantity. Now, Alex is going to talk about the feedback loop.
Thank you. So with our feedback loop, we have to go back to what we talked about with the Publix versus the market growth. We'll look in 2016 and see how the growths have compared, and we'll get a quantitative measure of how well our strategy worked, and we'll see what we can change. So what actions do we have to do to implement this strategy? We'll have to create the Publix tomato standards. We will have to assemble a third-party audit team to then investigate and see if these suppliers are up to our standards. And then if we decide to drop one, we have to let our customers know what we did and why. So I thank you all for being here, and we will concede the rest of our time. Thank you.